We're on the same
When I
side.
woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
One about the past and one about the future.
Hello, welcome to Draftvice. I am Walter. This is Draftvice. I'm still Walter, and I'll be Walter 5 minutes from now. But welcome to Draftvice. We're back. It's here. Draft's coming up. We're going to talk some potential prospects. We're going to talk some teams. We're going to talk some recent news. We're going to talk Ravens. We're going to talk... we'll talk New England. Yeah, we'll talk New England. Some Ravens talk. Maybe even the Colts. We'll throw the Colts in there. Not the Colts. Not the thing that Charles Manson ran. By the way, due to this Corona thing, I finally got to watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It was okay. But I just mentioned it because the other Manson, the Charles Manson cult was in that. So anyway, we're gonna take this right off the bat because there's some news going on right now. Coronavirus, the draft. Guess what, you guys? GMs are gonna have to draft like how we draft our fantasy football teams. It's going to be interesting because they all have to do it at home, and they can't even all be in the same room together. They're not allowed to go to each other's house and draft, which would suck, right? Like, isn't that the most fun part about drafting is having your friends around you? And all of a sudden, now you got to do this, like, for real, and your job's on the line. Even the GM of the Steelers was like, hey, can we get a couple of, like, extra rounders at the end? Like, can we get, like, an 8th, 9th, and 10th round? Like... And I don't think that's going to work because I feel like that requires, like, the NFLPA signing off. And I'm not too sure they'd be too eager saying, like, yeah, you guys get to have 10 rounds of a draft. Yeah, I don't think that's working. Because, honestly, like, when you're past, like, the 6th and 7th round, honestly, if you're a prospect, a lot of times it's better to be an undrafted free agent because you get to pick where you want to go. Whereas, like, a 7th rounder, you are locked in. So... I don't know, man. I think that part's just not going to happen. I feel like that would need some kind of NFLPA approval to get 3 extra rounds in a draft. But still, going to be kind of cool. Going to be interesting to watch. I really am. I heard Madden might end up doing a virtual version of the draft. That'd be kind of cool. Like, go ahead and get to watch that on Madden. I think that'd be an interesting way of doing it. I think they could probably pull it off relatively easily. So, I don't know. I'm kind of into that idea. Getting, like, a virtual reality version of the draft. Get to watch Goodell in VR mode and have all the boos going on in the audience. That's, like, but, like, it's a VR audience. We can all log in. We all go through, like, Xbox Live or PS4 and go ahead and start heckling him and booing when he comes out. Dude, that's really gonna suck. Like, imagine, like, you're Roger Goodell, right? You're like, yes, finally, I don't have to worry about going on stage and getting booed. And then they're like, no, we found a way to still get you booed, Roger. We still found a way. Anyway, Roger, sucks to be Roger. No, it doesn't. He gets paid so much. So much. Anyway, so yeah, we're here to talk about the draft. We're here to talk about some of the teams. I mentioned the 3 teams off the top. 3 teams. You guys are getting a bonus team because we're getting close to the draft. We're going to look to the future with some of these teams. The future. Back to the future. Yeah, so we got the Colts. I think the Colts are an interesting team to pick off right off the bat because they had so much stuff that's happened in the offseason, right? They traded a first-round pick to get DeForest Buckner. They signed Phillip Rivers. They still have Jacoby Brissett on the roster, and it doesn't sound like they're getting rid of him, which sounds kind of interesting because you now have almost like $46 million tied up to your quarterbacks, and whereas you can probably cut Jacoby Brissett and get like a good $10 million. Yeah, there'd be probably about $12 million in dead cap involved, but you'd at least free up another $10 to $12 million that you could spend on other players. And like, they're not totally up against the cap at this point. Maybe they're waiting. Maybe they're hoping they get like an offer of, like, they're not going to get an offer, by the way, because we're talking about the Patriots later. I'm going to explain why the Patriots probably aren't trading for Jacoby Brissett given his contract. Yeah, so we got this whole thing with the Colts. They don't have a first rounder anymore. But, you know, not for nothing, they do have. I'm going to tell you what they do have. They got 2 second-rounders, which is a decent amount. That's not a whole lot, but that's some money, man. That's some picks. 2 second-rounders, man. Like, you know, a late first-rounders. Like, the reason why you'll see a lot of teams trade back out of the first and get an extra pick is that a late first is very similar, like, hit rate-wise, as an early second or a mid-round pick. like as a mid second round pick. Top 50 players. Once you get out of the top like 10 to 15, usually it's like the hit rate from players like 15 to 50 are about the same, which is why you'll see a lot of times teams in the draft trade down to get an extra pick, because they're like, well, wait a second, get another like close to top 100 pick. We're getting some value out of this because we're still probably going to have the same hit rate, right? You picking at maybe 27 and trading down to 33 or something, or 35, and you go, you know what? Yeah, that, like, we might drop like 6 or 7 picks in the behind, but we get like a 4th rounder or a 3rd rounder. There's some real value to that. So that's why you see that happen in the draft all the time. And we saw the Colts do it last year, and now the Colts are in the 2nd round. They have 2 picks. They don't have a 1st rounder. They gave that to the San Francisco 49ers so they can get DeForest Buckner. And it's funny. We've seen this team be very competitive, right? We have 2, I would say, like very good quarterbacks on the roster. One who's definitely a top 30 quarterback or 32 quarterback, high-end backup, and the other one who has been a top quality starter in the NFL, started for the last 15 years for the Chargers, and now he's on the Indianapolis Colts. I think this is an interesting look at this team. Again, a lot of money tied up here, and not for nothing. Like I don't believe necessarily in all the weapons on that roster, right? Like I like Phillip Rivers, I love T.Y. Hilton, but this team doesn't really have a lot of money to go around anymore. Now you have all that money tied up to DeForest Buckner, Phillip Rivers. They do have Justin Houston on the D-line, Ben Banigou, a guy who they drafted last year. So they got some like D-line depth. They got some players there. They no longer have Jabal Sheard. He's out of town. They signed Xavier Woods and T.J. Carey, 2 corners that can help like fill out the depth on the roster, and maybe if they hit, they're like, oh, we got a value signing here, because they also have Quincy Wilson, and they also have and Rock Ya-Sin, who they drafted in the 2nd round the last couple of years. These are they got some corners that they've drafted. They signed a couple of corners too. They got rid of Pierre Tazier. It's a team that looks like it's still going to be competitive if we have league year this year, like if they actually end up having a 2020 NFL season. So I like what they've done around the defense. And the offensive line is probably one of the best in the NFL. You got Quentin Nelson. You got Anthony Costanzo back. You got Ryan Kelly. You got the right tackle that's there. They drafted Braden Smith. So they have a very good O-line. They have 2 good quarterbacks. What they need are weapons, right? They got a good linebacking core. They drafted Bobby Okereke last year. The year before that, they hit gold with another linebacker who got a first-year Pro Bowl nod. So I think that they not Okereke, the other linebacker who's out of my head right now. I should look. Anyway, so what is this team gonna do? Right? There's you look at their tight ends. Yeah, okay, they let Ebron go. They still have Jack Doyle, and then they got a lot of like no names like Mo Alley Cox, which is kind of a funny name, but more Cox, right? They got a couple of pieces there. They drafted Paris Campbell last year. We'll see if he ends up developing this year. He's got some speed to him, but he was never really he was a really good slot player. Maybe they stick him in the slot, have T.Y. on the outside. They let Devin Funchess go in free agency. He still hasn't really officially signed with the Packers, but there's been rumors to him to the Packers, and they've been tied close to him. Maybe we're waiting to hear that deal come out when he's officially had his medicals done, which can be who knows, given the current state of the NFL. So we have all these players sitting here that make up a really fun, interesting team. Like we saw them in the playoffs when they had Andrew Luck, and then Andrew Luck retires. We saw them be a pretty competitive team last year in the season, but they definitely were not able to hit peak levels last year with Jacoby Brissett. So what are they going to do? Are they going to go for maybe some other guys who are out there, like a Taylor Gabriel, or trade for a guy like Marquise Goodwin, another speedster, get some speed on that that offense. Could they trade for somebody else? We've seen a lot of trades go on with DeAndre Hopkins and Stephon Diggs. Are those guys going to end up being useful players this year? I don't know. I think that it's gonna are they gonna find somebody who they could trade for? Like maybe a Dante Pettis. This sounds like they have a good relationship with San Francisco. San Francisco's got a lot of receivers on their roster. They still might go ahead and draft somebody this year. So maybe they look at some guys, maybe like Dante Pettis. I know they re-signed Bourne. They just have a lot of pieces in San Francisco, and they have a lot of receivers. They let Emmanuel Sanders go. But they got Deebo Samuel. They could probably get a guy in this draft that they really wanted, one of the premium picks. They have the 13th overall pick that they got from the Colts. Maybe they'll be like, you know what? Maybe we can get another pick later on. We'll give you guys like Dante Pettis, and now you guys got like a guy who we think was good, but we've kind of found a guy already that we think is better. So there is some potential there, especially because he hasn't. They have guys who maybe haven't performed to expectations, guys who they can maybe. But I think it's going to be more of a draft thing, right? It's got to be. There's a couple of guys in this draft who fit where they could maybe be drafting, a receiver in the second round. You can get a guy like Laviska Shenault, maybe guys who didn't perform as well at the combine for injury reason, or maybe if Denzel Mims falls to the second round, you get a Denzel Mims, a guy who ran 4.33, had a good 3-cone, has shown that he can be like that he has some potential there. Like you got this big, fast guy. You could probably let him out the outside. He's not. Listen, this guy is not DK Metcalf. He's going to be good. He's going to be interesting. I'm definitely interested if you take him in the second or third round. He's got some speed to him, some juice. I would be interested in seeing him on the Colts. Another guy who's in a similar category to him, Jalen Reagor. Again, another guy who's got a good amount of speed. KJ Hamler out of Penn State. Now, a lot of these guys have not dealt with some real. Jalen Reagor's dealt with a little bit more coverage than coming out of TCU than some of the other guys. But even still, not a lot. Like they're not all dealing with a lot of press coverage. They're not all running a lot of refined routes. So there's going to be a learning curve with these guys. So it's figuring out with those guys what you can develop. And right now, it's really hard because you don't have the full draft process. And of those guys who've done well in this draft process, it was Denzel Mims. Was at the Senior Bowl, did well at the Senior Bowl, did well at the Combine. Jalen Reagor, wasn't a senior, so he wasn't eligible for the Senior Bowl. But, and he didn't blow up the Combine like people were expecting him to. So he didn't meet expectations, so maybe he falls a little bit. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you're taking a shot on a guy who you go, you know what? We know he bulked up for the scene, and we know he bulked up for the Combine, and he tried to keep some of his speed, and he was still relatively speedy, but he wasn't as fast as we thought he was going to be. So maybe it was he bulked up and tried to go ahead and make himself this bigger receiver, and maybe we can get him to slim down and go back to that old way of doing things. KJ Hamler, another guy who didn't do anything at the Combine, might slip a little bit, has some injury concerns. A guy who, was probably worth taking in the second round because, he's another guy who has some speed to him. And it seems like that's kind of the identity that the Colts go for. They want guys who have some speed on the outside and just be able to take the ball and go. Could just take it and, hit him and he went. Maybe get some guys like that can maybe break a couple of tackles or just, hey, it's all of a sudden boom, boom play. Like, he got him out there. He beat his guy and he went. Now, again, these are all projections. Maybe they trade down a little bit, get a couple of extra picks to kind of fill out their roster. This has been a big thing since their GM's been there. Frank Reich seems to really like Phillip Rivers, and I think this is going to be an interesting marriage. But they're going to want to stick some guys around Phillip Rivers outside of T.Y. Hilton and Jack Doyle, especially because Jack Doyle leads the tight ends in fumbling for the last 9 years. So, you want some other trusted hands in there, which is why I think they'll also maybe go for tight end in this draft, right? There's not a lot of guys you're going to take in the first 2 rounds, but there's a lot of guys who might be interesting if you take them in the 3rd and 4th round, like Cole Kmet, Adam Troutman, maybe some other guys. There's not Hurst. There's a couple of other tight ends that are in this draft that might be interesting. And they're one of the teams that it's like, listen, this draft class would help build out their, like, especially the receiving and the offensive weapons in this draft, kind of help what they might look for. They might look at getting another running back. Listen, now everybody's married to Marlon Mack. He's kind of getting close to the end of his deal. He's dealt with some injuries. He's played pretty well. I'm a big fan of Marlon Mack. But to be honest, like, I'm not looking to pay him when he comes up on his contract. So maybe you're looking at the next guy, the not Naheem Hines guy, the guy who's going to be, all right, we can have him down for maybe more than just the passing downs. Maybe you're looking at a guy like J.K. Dobbins. Maybe if Zach Taylor falls far enough and you're like, yo, this guy's got wheels too. Maybe you're looking for a 3-down guy who, maybe he doesn't play every snap, like Clyde Edwards-Helaire probably isn't playing every snap, but can probably play 60% of snaps or 50% of snaps and still do a lot out of the backfield. Now, there's a lot of things. I think what they need is to focus on offense now. Like they got DeForest Buckner. They spent some money on some of these 1-year deals, and maybe like they'll turn into something. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. They could also probably use a strong safety. But beyond that, I think a lot of their needs, maybe a pass rusher, right? Like they probably do need another pass rusher outside of Justin Houston. On the other side, maybe Ben Banigou doesn't turn out to what they want him to be. Maybe they can get a Curtis Weaver in the 2nd or 3rd round, or potential guy, maybe A.J. Epinesa falls to the 2nd round, which has been kind of rumored. A.J. Epinesa is, didn't have a great combine. He might have gotten hurt by that. A couple of other guys that might be in that 2nd to 3rd round range, like a Tyrell Lewis. I don't think, what's his name? Kayvon Chason will be there in the 2nd round. But with this draft and this year with this draft, you just really don't know. So there's guys you just might not be entirely sure on, and since you don't get to really get to, give them a pro day, get to have real meetings with them and work them out, they might look at it and go, listen, well, there might be guys who fall to the 2nd round who you wouldn't expect. Maybe guys who fall to the 3rd and 4th round that you don't expect. That's going to happen, especially the guys with injury concerns and, maybe potential red flags. So Colts are going to be interesting with that because they do seem to like to trade down, collect a lot of picks, and I'm sure at least one of those 2 second rounders will be traded down, and they will probably try to collect maybe a 4th round pick or a 5th rounder and just try to fill out their roster with other players. So that's the Colts. I'm kind of interested in the Colts. They're in a weird division, right? The AFC South. You get the Tennessee Titans with Ryan Tannehill. All right, like they're tough to beat. Deshaun Watson, but Deshaun Watson doesn't have DeAndre Hopkins anymore. And, Bill O'Brien, the GM, might be shooting Bill O'Brien, the coach, in the foot. So maybe we see the Colts take over that division. Jacksonville seems to be in rebuild mode again. So we'll see what happens with the AFC South. It seems to be an anybody-can-win division. I think the big question is, can they get rid of Jacoby Brissett and maybe be able to get a pick for him? Maybe not for this year, maybe for next year, because right now what it looks like is that a lot of teams are probably not going to be trading players away because those are more complicated trades, right? You got to work out, like, hey, what happens if, like, especially you can't do physicals right now with Corona. So, a lot of guys you might be trading like a week or 2 before the draft. You can work out a deal where it's like, hey, like, we get the physical done. A lot of those trades where the reason why you don't see a lot of player trades on draft night is that you have to have basically alternatives to if the player fails his physical, right? We're trading you, for instance, everybody talks about Trent Williams getting traded to the Jets or the Browns. Well, if you trade him on draft night, you need to have an alternative for if him or one of the players in that trade fails their physical, right? Like, say the Browns are going to trade Kareem Hunt and a 3rd round pick and a 2nd round pick next year for Trent Williams. That could totally work. It could also that Trent Williams might come to the Browns and they might be like, you know what, actually, like, he's injured. We can't do anything with him. Like, we just don't think he's going to pass this physical. Or on the reverse end, when Kareem Hunt has an injury that just is still lingering, or he doesn't sign his tender at that point. Can't trade a player who hasn't signed their tender a lot of time. I think with the restricted free agents, you can hold their rights, but I don't know. this is why you're probably not going to see a lot of trades on draft night, because you're not going to be able to get these physicals done for a long time. So, and even now you should be hearing about it. If they're going to do it, they'd probably be doing it now if you were hearing about these trades, because you would be trying to figure out a way of doing these physicals. And a lot of, again, a lot of medical personnel are dedicated to trying to fight the coronavirus. Thank you, them. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with Jacoby Brissett. I just don't think they're going to get anything for him right now. I think, if anything, they might trade him maybe to a team in the offseason that maybe misses out on a major player. Say the Chargers, right? Maybe the Chargers miss out on getting a quarterback that they like, and they decide to take a tackle in the top 10, and they're like, you know what, we'll wait for Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts gets drafted or something. Maybe they go a different direction. So, what about them Ravens? Baltimore. I like Baltimore. Actually, I don't like Baltimore. I'm a Browns fan, so. But Lamar Jackson. Definitely playing well last year, and I like what the Ravens have done. Like, as a guy who's against them, not a fan of the Ravens. I call them the Ratbirds. But they traded for Calais Campbell, got a fifth. Traded away a fifth, gave him a little bit of an extension. They're in win now mode. Everybody. They were going to sign Michael Brockers, and that's a guy who didn't pass a physical, right? It's a big deal. Oh, you didn't pass the physical? Now you're going to be a little bit worried about him. They traded away Hayden Hurst, got a second rounder. They signed Derek Wolfe to replace the guy who they thought they were going to get out of Michael Brockers, kind of replace that position as well. They re-signed Jalen Smith. They have Marlon Humphreys. They re-signed Marcus Peters during the season. They franchise tagged Matt Judon. They still have Matt Skura on an original Ron tender, but that means they're not really worried about losing him, because somebody else can come along and sign him. And Marshall Yanda, their all-pro guard, retired. So they've had a busy offseason, a very interesting offseason. They seem to be making use out of this fifth-round picks. And keep in mind, they still got a bunch of picks. They still have 2 second-round picks. They have a first-round pick. They have 2 thirds, 2 fourths. They've got a lot of picks in this draft. And with those moves, I mean, their defense definitely sounds scary with Calais Campbell and Matt Judon returning, and I know there's some questions whether they were going to trade Judon for a pick, and that's still a possibility, but I don't see a lot of teams being overly eager to trade for Matt Judon. I just don't think he was ever going to be as hyped as he would have been on the free market. Like, you're seeing Jadeveon Clowney not signed right now. I would rather have Jadeveon Clowney than Matt Judon. So with the cap space they have, they're pretty much done in free agency. They're pretty much done with the big signings. Like I said, they have quite a few picks in the top 100. 4 picks in the top 100, 5 picks in the top 3 rounds. They got 2 fourth-rounders. They got a lot of picks to play around with. So I don't see them just jumping on and getting another running back in the first round unless they really love a guy. I see them more going, filling out the defense, filling out the offensive line, especially because, they lost some major players on the offensive line. Maybe getting some more receivers to that receiving core. Maybe try to fill out, positions that they lost in trades and be able to, replace, maybe get they cut Tony Jefferson in the offseason. Maybe get a strong safety to kind of match up with what they have with Earl Campbell. Get some firepower for our boy Lamar Jackson. I was a big Lamar Jackson fan coming out of the draft. I was hoping he wouldn't go to the Baltimore Ravens. Unfortunately, he did. And I like what he can do. So is he going to take the next step forward? Our team's going to catch on to what they do, and is he going to be able to work against what, is he going to develop more? Is kind of the big question. I think they need more interior offensive linemen in this draft than they got good tackles. They got Orlando Brown. They got not Taylor Decker. They got a tackle on the other side. They drafted in the first round a couple of years ago. So they've got a lot of weapons. Their offensive line is in okay shape. Maybe they go for linebackers and safeties as you get towards the middle of the day 2 of this draft. There's a lot of guys with some interesting potential. Maybe they go for another corner just because, hey, you know what? You're going to lose guys eventually. So you need to keep building out that corner depth. And then again, like, their receiving corps leaves a lot to be desired outside of Marquise Brown. So I can definitely see them going maybe another tight end, maybe in the third or fourth round, just because they traded away Hayden Hurst. Now what are they going to get out of that? And they might be one of those teams that says, hey, we'll get future picks. Fuck it, we'll trade down and get some future guys. And like I said before, I could see them using maybe a second round or a third round pick on a running back, because then you're getting some real value out of him. And there's a lot of guys who could be there in the second and third round who you're like, you know what? Kind of like what this guy can do. Cam Akers, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There's just like 6 or 7 or 8 guys. Zach Moss. There's enough guys in this draft that it's like, hey, we can get this guy, and they might be able to share a part of this offense. You get a guy like Jonathan Taylor. Imagine having Jonathan Taylor combined with the speed of Lamar Jackson. Like, now you don't need Mark Ingram. So they might look into getting him. Like I said, I am not a fan of the Ravens, but I am a fan of how they've worked the last few years and what they've been able to develop and be able to do. They are definitely a well-run organization, and you're seeing, honestly, I was a little shocked when they went into this year with what they, and initially at the beginning of the year, they were not all that great. Their defense just developed. They, especially after they drafted Marcus Peters. It's the offense that took everybody by surprise, and being able to play a little bit of ball controlling. Yeah, they played a couple of easier games in the beginning that kind of helped them along. But again, like, there's a reason why they made it to the playoffs last year. They are definitely the lead team in the AFC North, unfortunately. But I think there's a reason for it. I think that they know how to build a team. They've built it around Lamar Jackson. Now everything comes down to can Lamar Jackson continue to develop and grow? And also, will teams figure out how to shut them down? So I promised you 3 teams today, right? I promised you the Colts. I promised you the Ravens. And now we're going to get into New England. Whoa, sorry. Now I promised you New England. New England is going to be an interesting team. No more Tom Brady. Right? They lost Ted Karras to free agency. I'm not too sure they were all out worried about losing him. Kyle Van Noy, they lost to free agency. But I think the big one, obviously, is the quarterback who's been their quarterback for 20 years. Tom Brady, man. And now he's a Buccaneer. They've got Jared Stidham and Brian Hoyer on their team to play quarterback. If you don't know about Brian Hoyer, he's been around the league. He's played pretty well in a lot of spot starts. He was on the Bears. He was on the Browns. He was on San Francisco, and a lot of teams, a lot of coaches seem to value him, right? But he got traded away when he was on San Francisco. They didn't care much for him. He decided to come straight to the Patriots for a cheap deal so he can go ahead and stay on and be like, hey, listen, maybe I can get a chance to start if Jared Stidham doesn't play well. So he's going to be competing with Jared Stidham, right? We have not seen a lot from Jared Stidham. Nobody knows really what Jared Stidham is. Now, again, there's something to be said with that system about how they develop quarterbacks and players and being able to read coverages into that system. They still have Edelman at 30-something years old. Maybe they get a little bit more out of N'Keal Harry. Maybe he learns and develops that into that system. Again, it's a hard system to learn. The Patriots the Patriots offense is a hard offense to get a hold of. They franchise tagged Joe Thuney, the guard. The question is, are they going to just sit with the 2 guys they've got going in? They cut Cody Kessler. R.I.P. Cody. But, are they going to sit with the 2 guys they got going in, or are they going to draft somebody? And a lot of people are like, well, maybe they trade up in this draft. Now, keep in mind, the Patriots don't have a second-round pick. They do have 3 third-round picks. They got a bunch of 6th-rounders and a couple of 7th-rounders. They have 12 picks in this draft. They are not by all means out on potentially trading up. It's just going to cost a lot. It's probably going to cost you a 1st-rounder next year, your 2nd-rounder next year even, or even a future 1st or 2nd-rounder beyond 2021. So, yeah, it's possible they trade up. It's also possible that Bill Belichick just knows what he's doing because he's been knowing what he's doing for the last 20 years. So it's possible he looks at it and goes, you know what? I feel comfortable with Jared Stidham. If he's not the guy, we're going to end up losing next year anyway. So what are we going to do? We also have Brian Hoyer. He knows the system. Maybe, they've made Matt Castle look good before, so maybe he can make Brian Hoyer look good too. And there's a lot to be said for that. Now, what are they going to do with that first-round pick, right? Are they going to get something out of that? Are they going to trade back and maybe take a Jalen Hurts? Are they going to are they going to draft a quarterback in this draft? They don't have room to spend on anybody. They can't trade for, I mentioned before that they're probably not trading for Jacoby Brissett. They don't have the money to take on that guy's contract. Brady leaving hit them with a $15 million dead cap hit. And again, when you combine that with what they did with Joe Thuney, they don't really have much room to go into, spending on a lot of players. So it really sounds like they're going to try and build out some of their depth. They were able to re-sign Devin McCourty. They could cut Dante Hightower if they really wanted to clear up some space, but I don't think they're doing that. Just because it doesn't sound like something they would do. I think you'll probably see a step forward from Chase Winovich. I like Chase Winovich. I think a lot of people liked him coming out last year. The fact that they got him in the third round, they just seem to do that. They seem to find guys who fall to the second and third round who end up playing like a good pass rusher role for them. They had with them with Trey Flowers. They trade for Kyle Van Noy. He ended up being a player for them. They just seem to develop a system that works, and they seem to get guys who just seem to fall to like third, fourth round spots, and they take them and then they turn them into gold. So I'm interested to see what the Patriots do. I think a lot of people are. Are they going to take another receiver? Are they going to try to add weapons to this roster? Because keep in mind, it takes time to develop into this scheme. So it usually, even I think Gronk had said, Gronk and Brady and everybody's talked about this system. It takes about 2 years to really figure out this system. So I don't know. I'm a big fan of this team. Not really, I'm a big fan of how they run. I'm a big fan of how actually all three of these teams, I'm a big fan of how they think and how they run, right? Accumulate picks, don't overpay for a certain position, maybe go ahead and take a shot on some underrated guys or guys who fall, kind of stick to your board. They're playing, especially with Belichick, he's playing three-dimensional chess. He's kind of like, hey, maybe he does know more about this kid than anybody else. So I don't know. I'm interested. I'm interested in seeing what the New England Patriots do. I think there are a lot of teams that think they are on. I think there's a lot of people that think they're on their way out. That losing Brady is the death nail, and I don't agree with that. But I don't know. I don't know. None of us know. We don't know what Bill Belichick's plan is. They're probably not signing anybody to any major contracts this offseason. Whether it's Jameis Winston or Cam Newton, they just don't have a lot of money left. They don't have the money to spend on these guys. So it's either going to be for them, hey, listen, maybe we'll lose this year. Or maybe Brian Hoyer comes in and runs that system really well because he did well when he was playing on the Texans in this system. He knows this system very well. He's played in this system. He developed in this system. So maybe he ends up being a real valuable player. Or maybe Jared Stidham really is going to end up being much better than people expected. So I think these three teams, these are teams that have been very well run for the last 20 years and are expected winners. At least two of these teams are making the playoffs this year. That is my prediction. Out of the Ravens, Colts, and New England, at least two of them, right? All AFC teams, at least two of them are making to the playoffs. I'm telling you right now, two. Especially if they're doing this new format. I don't know if the new format goes into effect. I think they were voting on it. I think that these are three very well run teams, and if they're not in the playoffs this year, they'll be next year. They're just that good teams. Anyway, you can follow the podcast at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice_football on Instagram. You can follow me at BROJO Death DEATH Punch PUN. Like that thing, like pun, and then CH. Yeah, Brojo Death Punch. Anyway, and if you want, follow, subscribe. I got a new project coming out called Punk Law 101, and it relates to a couple of other things that I do in my spare time. So, look into some of that stuff. This is going to be fun, everybody. Not the coronavirus, but the draft. It's coming. It's here. It's almost here.
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
About the past and about the future.